Okay. Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Tuesday, April 15th, 2025. It's tax day. Hope you all put your taxes in. For filing extensions. Don't forget, our former deputy commissioner is here, and I was in Ways and Means when he was the former deputy commissioner, or the deputy commissioner, not former then. So we're delighted to have Doug Farnham with us as the Chief Recovery Officer. We've been talking about federal funding, and we've seen some things about FEMA, and it's probably a good time anyway to get an update on what's happening in that world. So delighted to have you. Thanks for joining us, Doug.
Thank you for having me, Madam Chair. So would you just like me to just dive right in?
Absolutely. Introduce yourself and dive in.
For the record, Douglas Farnham, Chief Recovery Officer for the state of Vermont. Before going to the slides, I would just kind of give a brief overlay. We have a number of active disasters right now, dating back over the last several years. Of course, the one that sticks in everyone's mind is July 2023. That was a major disaster, the estimated damages being more than double what was experienced in Irene. A big contributing element of that financial damage actually was in the Capitol complex, of course, and the central garage down on Route 302, and then 3 wastewater facilities, Hardwick, Ludlow, and Johnson, that were significantly impacted. And especially Johnson has experienced repetitive damage. And if you just go to that site, you can tell this is a very dangerous water treatment facility to be. Ludlow being in a similar boat. Hardwick, I think, has a little bit less vulnerable position, but still looking at trying to reduce their risks. So that disaster from 2023 has most of the financial value, estimated at around $600 million worth of damage. Then, of course, we had December storm in 2023. We had several July storms in 2024. And one of the interesting things about the July storms in 2024 is that the amount of municipal road and building damage, if you take out the wastewater facilities and we didn't experience any significant state damage in 2024, fortunately. If you take out that portion, the municipal damages in the early July storm were nearly equal to what was experienced in July of 2023. And I think most people think of 2023 as a much bigger storm. But the main difference was 2024 July was more localized and impacted Linden, Kirby, Plainfield. It impacted the Northeast Kingdom much more significantly than 2023 did. So, and we're now getting those estimates in that they're still rolling in. They're still being refined. But we do have over $80 million currently estimated with FEMA, and our estimates show over $100 million. And one reason I didn't include slides that show like where every project is with FEMA is that fluctuates on a daily basis, and there are many numbers that we don't agree with yet. And so if I pull data from their portal, it is not, in my opinion, accurate. So converting that to our estimates is a bit tricky, and that's one reason I didn't want to provide misleading data. But and then the end of July storm of 2024 was significant enough to clear individual assistance thresholds and other things, but it was still smaller. We're earlier in refining those estimates, but $10 to $20 million, that more of that range. The early July storm is. Sorry if I'm jumping back and forth a little bit, Madam Chair.
It's all the same. It's really all the same.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten there was end of July as well as early July.
Right.
Yeah.
We did have a little bit of good weather in between the two, unlike July of 2023, where it just rained for an entire month. But the early July storm, I forgot the point I was going to make with that one. Sorry.
July storm. Yeah, okay.
The end of July storm was smaller, right, but still close enough to kind of flow together in people's minds, because some people that were flooded in the beginning of July were again flooded in the end of July, and it did hit some of the same locations. So it tended to actually hit a lot of people for the third or even fourth time if they were hit in the December of 2023 storm. So, and I know this is appropriations, but I will say the mental aggregation of all those events on some portions of our state has been very significant, especially for a flood survivor to be hit multiple times in such a short amount of time has been very difficult for people. So we do have case management efforts. We do have mental health grants and efforts where we're trying to compensate for that. But I will say we're only compensating as much as we can and to the best of our ability. And Vermonters, I say this lovingly, being from the Northeast Kingdom, we can be stubborn. We don't always like to ask for help. And sometimes we wait until it's a crisis, right, to ask for help. So we've definitely seen that tendency in our communities. But the July 2023 storm, the one I said was around 100 million. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. The July 2024 storm is coming in estimates just over 100 million. And financially, that is actually in the worst possible place for Vermont. And I say that because when we hit around 100 and the formula is now about $115 million worth of damages from one declared event, then FEMA considers whether or not to go from 75 to 90. If it's below that threshold, they never make a recommendation to the president to increase the cost share. So we stay at that 25% cost share, and then the state picks up between 70 and 30% of the non-federal share for the localities. So it actually could be more expensive of a disaster from a cost share perspective than the July of 2023 event, unfortunately.
So you said it's about 115 million is where they decide?
Yes.
And we're close to that number.
We could theoretically squeak across it in a couple of years because it would rely on us getting to final agreement with FEMA on our bigger damage amounts. And because there were no major facilities involved in the July of 2024 event, we will likely get final numbers sooner than we do for the July of 2023 event, because those complex facilities are taking us more time to negotiate what the actual repair costs will be with FEMA. And roads and simple municipal buildings now, not all municipal buildings are simple, but most of the ones impacted in July of 2024 were, not your big complicated office buildings, salt sheds, garages, things that can estimate fairly quickly what the repair costs would be. So it's possible. I think it's still unlikely we'll clear that threshold. And I'm not intending to be alarmist in any way, but the elevation from 75% cost share to 90% cost share is not automatic. It is a recommendation FEMA makes to the president, and the president has to sign and approve that.
Oh,
So take that as you will.
yes, I do. Thank you. And then, yes, go ahead, Tom.
And just full disclosure, my wife is the chair of or co-chair of the local long-term recovery group and has communicated with Doug a lot. So if this sounds like it's, my wife is sending me with questions.
She is.
But I just want to, not so much that, but it's the 75 to 90% is new to me, just in the understanding, as we discuss this over coffee every morning. But the idea of, so that's more expensive to the localities, to the local municipalities, to the state as well. Is it impacting the rate of funds being brought into the state? Because for the long-term recovery group in Waterbury, there's been some funding that was supposed to be funneled through the state that is not delayed, frozen. I'm not sure what the right phrase is, and I'm sure that's affecting not just Waterbury and the other towns in our vicinity, but towns like in the Northeast Kingdom that were never expecting to get hit like the way they did. Is that coming from the federal stuff? I mean, FEMA is notoriously slow, but how is it affecting your work in terms of getting some of these funds that applications are coming in really clean? it's really clear for that which has been noted. And how is this interplaying with the 75 to 90? How is this interplaying with what's actually coming from the government in order to disperse?
So the 75 to 90 for the 2024 storms, honestly, before looking at the estimates recently, I never considered that we would hit that threshold. I thought it was very, very unlikely. I've kind of downgraded that to unlikely. And then if we cross the threshold, it will be by very little. And it would be easy for a president to say, well, yeah, you crossed the threshold, but by like $20. So I'm not going to approve a cost share increase.
So the cost, I'm just doing quick math here. If it was, well, I'm thinking if it was $100 million of damage, right? It would cost us $25 million, the state. And,
Yes.
and if it was at 90%, it would be 10 million. So there's a $15 million cost to the state
Right.
or to the municipalities or to whoever, somebody that's not the federal government. And if it's 150 million, it's just slightly higher than that, but we're talking 15 to $20 million more costs, right?
Um,
When did you get a change? Assuming it's 25%. The money we put in the budget to help those communities, what does that bring it up to?
so
It was payment to a handful of communities that were impacted.
So there were two different lanes that were in the BAA. One was, and that will be getting rolled into the budget, right? One is a top up of $8 million. I believe it was 8 million approximately for ERAF. So for our cost share portion, and that will cover 3/4 or so of the projected cost share need from 2024. So we will need to ask for additional funds later as the numbers crystallize, as they get better. We'll probably need to ask for a little bit more cost share money. There was other money that was, I think, 1.8 million that was, that money, the administration doesn't necessarily support because it wasn't linked to any projects. It wasn't linked to repairing your communities, and it was kind of all-purpose money. And
Non-FEMA, wasn't that?
it was the
FEMA
non-FEMA money.
For
Yes.
communities who got hit, and some communities didn't qualify for FEMA, but still had the problem, so.
Right. And there was a kind of an attempt to correct the Addison County issue
Yeah.
from 2023.
Right.
I would say one thing's from Rep. Stevens' question earlier. The money that is flowing to long-term recovery groups, the groups that help individual flood survivors, that hasn't been impacted by FEMA at all, because for better or worse, FEMA does not really support long-term recovery groups in any way. They provide advice, and sometimes that can be very helpful. They'll provide staff that come in and advise the long-term recovery groups, but they don't provide any financial support. The Agency of Administration was providing small grants to long-term recovery groups to help them basically provide, just maintain their basic administrative structure. And that money has been primarily delayed just by my staff being overworked. And I just haven't been able to get the grant agreement signed and get the money out the door for the long-term recovery groups. FEMA did institute, on the PA side, on the public assistance side, they did institute a manual review process earlier in the year that, under uniform guidance, was allowed and added 30 days of potential review to any draw requests or project requests. So we saw kind of when that manual review process was put in place, we did see a lull. We saw kind of 30 days where nothing moved as FEMA figured out how to do that manual review. But that 30-day window did expire, and we have started to see draws, and we have started to see obligations start to move again. So we did have that kind of short blackout period that was administratively allowed under uniform federal guidance. And now we are seeing those projects move again. So just within the last couple of weeks, we've seen millions of dollars obligated through projects, and we've seen our draws satisfied, which is good to see that progress again.
John's question.
So, as you're trying to like estimate what it's gonna cost here over time here, all the immediate stuff that had to happen, short-term kinds of things we can. But now you're kind of in this little bit of a long-term stuff you're looking at down the road here. I'm just thinking about, bridge replacement things. So we put a lot of temporary bridges on.
Yep.
Secretary Flynn noted a lot of that, and noted that those things aren't going to be immediately taken out and put back in at a point in time they will be. Is that part of your estimate, or is that part of like the perhaps some long-term work that we could grab some additional federal monies for? Is that part of your estimate? It's kind of hard to.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get things back to a practical, functional state here as best we can right now.
Yeah, excellent question. And that's actually provides me a really good segue to start walking through the slide.
There we go.
Because starting from the left-hand side of this chart, the top bar, the biggest chunk, out of the damages, the estimated damages for disasters occurring in 2023 and 2024. So if you take all of those different disaster declarations from the very, very large historic one down to the smallest one, we had an estimated $642 million worth of damage for things that the work has not been completed yet. So this is where bridges will fit in, where the repair of the Capitol complex, the central garage, those projects that we haven't, it's damages from the storm. But we haven't spent the money. We're not waiting on reimbursement. So, and when I say we, in that case, it would be either the state or the municipality. 173 million of that damage. So $815 million total between state and municipalities. And that, by the way, does not include federal highways. So if you rolled the federal highways damage in, we've had over $1 billion worth of damage. But this is just FEMA. 173 million where the work has been completed, the money has been spent. And so this is what is primarily causing hardship with a lot of our municipalities right now.
Because they hadn't been reimbursed.
This is the sticky wicket. Yeah. So as this flows down, out of that 173, 149 is the federal share. And then 24 million is the non-federal share, a portion of which will be covered by the state. In July of 2023 storm, that storm in particular, we are covering 78% of the non-federal share, which is above the maximum that ERAF usually allows. And all the other ones, it depends on what mitigation measures they have in place. So out of that 149, where it's the federal dollars, the federal government has obligated 104 million out of that 149. And 45 million has yet to be obligated. And what that really means is the feds haven't agreed on what the exact project cost should be and written it into a grant agreement. So 104 out of the 45 is pretty good when you consider that number includes the 2024 damages. And they're writing agreements for that pretty quickly. But most of the work complete for 2023, that is in agreement, in an agreement somewhere. A very large portion of it. So it took a while. It took a couple of years, but we are getting there as far as having the agreements in place on all of the smaller stuff. This, to rewind briefly, the 642 Capitol complex is a roughly $200 million project. There's roughly $100 million worth of wastewater facilities. Central garage could be another 20 to 25 million. So there are some really big ticket items.
How much is the total state? I didn't add it up fast enough.
Sorry.
But you said those three. So of this state buildings is how much of the 642?
The state buildings
And garages or.
would be between 200 and 250 million, I believe, is the state portion of that 642.
Okay.
And then $100 million of wastewater treatment facilities, roughly. It takes another big portion of that.
Sure.
And then Montpelier has some fairly large complex projects that they're negotiating with FEMA as well. And then you've got a lot of bridge projects the temporary bridge and the expense for that will be a different cost with FEMA. And then bridge repair, been done yet, will be part of that 642. So a lot of bridge work. And that's what fits into that work yet to be completed.
And not agreed to yet?
Yes, that's correct. Even as recently as last week, FEMA Region 1 came up and visited, and we had a great all-day meeting with them, talking through the Capitol complex, and then we had another meeting the next day on the Central Garage project. So the FEMA Region 1, they cover, basically New England. Those staff, extremely helpful, productive, trying to work through getting that project amount negotiated with us. One of the reasons we're not there yet is FEMA's process requires every light bulb, every ceiling tile to be part of a line item. And so 133 State Street damages are over 1,200 line items that our staff had to go through and make sure were accurate in order to validate. Because we had cost estimates for repair last August. We had initial estimates from our contractors, but we have to keep rewinding and documenting every last element of damage with FEMA to get them to move forward.
And for those that were on the meeting last year, we did that tour and we saw, as part of me says, only 1,200. But it wasn't all the upper stories. It was mostly the basement and sub-basement.
Right. And then we have to align, every line item has to have the relevant section of code that forces us to take the course of action we're taking. And so we've made a lot of progress over the last 6 months working with FEMA on that. We've actually gotten some of our foundational cost documents signed and agreed on with them. So we are making really good progress. It's just a very laborious process.
So you mentioned that there had been sort of a pause and now things are happening again. Are you noticing any other changes in terms of the state's relationship with FEMA, your ability to get information from them, their responsiveness, willingness to work with Vermont, things like that?
Honestly, they are shutting down the Joint Field Office in Williston. That is decommissioning and will be gone by June 30th. That's not that outside of the realm of expectation, honestly. I do think FEMA writ large, because we had the Joint Field Office open after the 2023 floods, they didn't fully restart the clock for us after the 2024 floods. So they're like, well, we've been here for 2 years. It's like, yes, but we had a major event last year. But that event actually is going really well. We had to iron out a lot of kinks after 2023. And then we went into a new disaster fresh, and we used the lessons we learned to move faster with them and the teams we had in place. So 2024 is moving faster. I do think we'll continue to see towns get their money faster. Our connections with FEMA, other than that additional manual review that kind of slowed things down for that 30-day window, been productive and positive, honestly. There was a recent example where AOT has a federal preemption on railroad property. And FEMA could have used that to say, oh, well, you didn't get permits for any of your work, so we're not going to approve any of your projects. Technically, they could have taken that position. They could have even taken a more aggressive position to say, well, you clearly don't apply your regulations in a uniform way since you're letting AOT manage the rail properties, so we don't have to honor your flood hazard area river corridor. They didn't take that approach, and they negotiated with us, okay, here's what we need to see in order to reimburse for rail properties in Vermont. Since AOT didn't follow the standard process, they're legally allowed to do that. Let's work out how to get to yes. So they did work with us productively and didn't just try to slam the door on us. So I think they're still working with us pretty well.
So this is rail trails, the rail trail properties, or what about the active railroads? The two different things?
Mostly active rail is where they have the exemption. I think the rail trail properties, I don't think AOT has the same level of preemption and exemption. Active rail has its own, legal treatment that's pretty locked in. Yeah, unique. So I think, we have been working very productively with the region staff, and that's who we'll primarily work with when the joint field office closes down. We'll primarily work with the region office.
Where's-
Getting along. I think it's down in, New Hampshire, Manchester or something.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, I think it might be Boston. Yeah.
Okay,
But-
thanks.
So with the 104 million that they've obligated, so we have, or that they have set up the agreement for us, we have drawn down 49 million of that. A big portion of that has been for towns. And we have not yet drawn down 55 million. And a lot of that is waiting on closeout documents, paperwork. This data is from March 14th. And right around that time frame, I worked out a way to accelerate our draws with Vermont Emergency Management to try to get more draws, because they were taking an extremely best practice approach to where you make sure all the paperwork lines up before you draw the cash down. So I had them dial that back a little bit so that we could more proactively get some of the cash drawn down, because under the Stafford Act, if you have drawn down funds, FEMA has to take certain steps legally. This is not something the executive could change. It's a Stafford Act provision. They have to demonstrate certain things before they can recapture those funds from you. So having the funds drawn down with FEMA in particular, doesn't work with all federal programs this way, but with FEMA, if you have the money, then you actually, the burden of proof is on FEMA to prove that you shouldn't have that money anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that that 49 million increases dramatically, also to help with the municipal cash flow issues, because there's a huge amount of, if you look at as of this snapshot, there was 173 million of work completed by either the state or municipalities. And I could improve the slides by separating those categories.
John had a question.
And then only 49 million of that is cash in hand. So
Okay.
there's over 100 million of outstanding debt.
Right. Okay, John, go ahead.
Just real quick, because I know a couple of towns I interact with here. Work's been completed, but we're waiting to get that cash in hand and pay their bills here. What's been the size of that gap? Is that getting better? Sounds like things are getting better because we're maybe, I hate to say this, more used to having to, go through this.
We are getting a little bit faster at it, but just at a quick rough cut between,
I understand there's going to be.
Yeah. Between state and municipality, this shows a gap of 124 million still existing. I think a big portion of that, maybe 100 million of it, is actually municipal. So we did a couple programs in the state. Last year, the treasurer worked with the bond bank to lend out $15 million to municipalities. Then the emergency board approved AOA to lend out $5 million from the ERAF fund, basically using our cash balance to lend and then anticipating we get it back in before we needed it for match. And then the treasurer and the bond bank have recently done another round of $13 million of lending. So there's been about $33 million of lending activity over the last 2 years that is new and different, and I've never really done it that way before.
Is anybody paying any of that back yet? Or
So this round of 13 million
not the new one, but the.
is mostly recycled. So the $15 million, a lot of that was reimbursed from FEMA, and
Okay.
that freed it up to be issued as $13 million of new loans.
Our own little revolving loan fund.
Yes, yes. So the treasurer, through the 2.5%, working with the bond bank, is trying to revolve some of those municipal loans. But in giving out around 13 million, the bond bank told me they still received approximately 30 million in applications. So and that's actually a similar number to what we had after the 2023 event. We had lending out 15, I think we got about 35 million in applications. So there is still a pretty high unmet need out there for municipal cash. Any questions on FEMA public assistance before I move over to, and I may have burned all my time, Madam Chair.
No, you're
How much time I
fine,
have?
actually. Since we're not on the floor till 10, as I was reminded, this is Tuesday, not Friday. You can keep going. Thank you.
So if there's no questions on FEMA public assistance,
That looks good. Okay.
moving over to hazard mitigation. So this, of course, is our main opportunity to make things better, right? Our hazard mitigation is generally based off of 15% of the estimated damages through the FEMA public assistance program. So on that last slide where we had 815 million estimated, eventually that makes its way through a 15% calculation. If our estimates are correct and FEMA accepts them, and they probably will whittle us down some, that could result in approximately 120 million of hazard mitigation funds, which would be great. Right now we have a little over 70 million locked in with FEMA. And that's what we've been using to primarily run the state hazard mitigation program right now. So this slide is all about buyouts. And the reason it is all about buyouts is because we've received over 270 buyout applications, and that essentially consumes the existing amount of our hazard mitigation award. So if all of the, and we've had 5 withdrawn, and I anticipate some additional buyouts will fall out.
How did they fall out? They-
A number of reasons. Usually people don't engage in the process unless they're, serious. Like I know in Waterbury, we had a number of properties that we really wanted to take a buyout, like that did not, like commercial apartments and things like that. But usually if it's a homeowner and they approach the buyout, the only reason that it might fall out is honestly, sometimes they run out of patience and time and they sell the property and they move away. And, sometimes they sell at a loss, but they just can't make things fit together any longer. Because unfortunately, 3 years is generally the fastest buyout I've seen going through, records. It's a very slow process. We're hoping to accelerate it, but we are already, of course, we're almost 2 years out from the disaster, but we're, less than a year and a half out from when we got the actual grant award to start moving.
And just quickly, the other piece that we've seen in Waterbury is sometimes, or in the area, not specifically to Waterbury, the select board may not approve of a local buyout. So, and then we dealt with that in the BAA or the budgeting process where there's going to be money to change the tax purposes. But, the select boards are very anxious about the loss of, not only the loss of tax revenue, but what does it mean if your neighborhood all of a sudden has holes in it?
Yeah.
So it's not all FEMA's.
Right.
It's just another facet. So.
Right. Overall, some communities had as high as a 50% refusal rate for buyouts. And yes, legally, the state cannot move forward with a buyout without the municipality approving it. It has to be approved by the municipality. And yes, that grand list stabilization program was intended to help compensate for that, help mitigate for that, and take some of the short-term finances at least out of the picture. I don't think it completely solves the problem, right? Because there are some communities that when they're looking at it from a community planning perspective, they really don't think that piece of land is appropriate for a buyout. They don't want that particular piece of land to be permanently conserved. And I think everybody who looks at a floodplain looks at it just a little bit differently. I'm going to look at a floodplain and say, okay, I think we should try to support developing along the very edge and make sure we have public safety access to the back of the property. But if you go deeper in the floodplain, those people are stranded in the event of a major flood. I don't want that situation. I don't think the state should support that situation. But other communities are going to say, well, we only have so much land. We need to develop a little bit deeper into the floodplain, and those people will be safe even if stranded. And so the transit center in Montpelier is a good example of that. The building was perfectly safe. It was still perfectly functional, but they couldn't leave. And if anyone had had a health issue, anything like that, it would have been very difficult to. Now, our Swiftwater teams are great, so I'm confident they would have boated over to the building, gotten the person, and gotten them out, but the additional time could have complicated their health issues. So I think every community is slightly different in that way. But yes, I think, thank you, Representative, that Grand List Stabilization Program is intended to try to help with, if they're not approving a buyout because they can't make this year's budget work, that's an unfortunate decision. If they're not approving a buyout because they're like, no, we really need this to be redeveloped and it's close enough to the edge of the floodplain, it can be safe still. And everyone has a slightly different definition of safe.
So there's one property like in our area, it's in Lindenville actually, and they have a long history of having some flooding in the spring. It happens not to the degree that they've had in the last 2+ years here of things. And I don't know where they stand in terms of buying out that particular property, but other businesses around them have took it upon themselves to a better height of land to have a building on, kind of mitigating that. So if the town was looking, and this is a business that's been there for a long time, here for sure, more than 40+ years, but they just kind of gave up on it. They just can't deal with it anymore here. So if I don't know what the situation is currently, but just as a theoretical question, if a municipality of a area of land like that, relatively small here, for redevelopment purposes, is there something that a municipality could apply for to maybe do that very thing, to keep that piece of property here for a business purpose and not lose that taxable, piece of the process?
So the hazard mitigation program is almost entirely consumed by buyouts right now, but it can be used.
That is right.
Yes, it can be used for elevations. However, if you're in the floodplain, you need enough land to be able to balance the impact. Almost every town in Vermont has a no negative impact on the floodplain kind of provision because of national flood insurance policy, where if you elevate a certain portion to protect your building more, you have to take fill from somewhere else. And especially in commercial or industrial areas, you have brownfields issues where you're not necessarily allowed to disturb that ground because you could be, you have to test it. It's expensive. FEMA won't pay for brownfields remediation or environmental testing. They require that the site be clean. And under ARPA, there were some brownfields appropriations that were created. They were very, very helpful in redeveloping some pieces of land. And there are still some federal programs that do help with brownfields remediation. But one reason they were created under ARPA was because they're not sufficient to meet the need and they're difficult to use. And so I don't think overall, they're not usually a great option. They're challenging.
Thank you.
So usually you're going to run into a lot of situations where the math doesn't work on the parcel and they're not able to raise the building enough because they don't have enough available land to trim.
Okay, so let's continue on your buyout.
So we've got the map on the right that shows kind of the hotspots of how many buyouts are ongoing, right? Where those are located around the state, which matches the damage pattern fairly well. Central and northeastern Vermont was, the most impacted in 2023, and then the only part impacted in 2024. So southern Vermont didn't really get hit in the 2024 storms to a massive degree. We did see buyout interest spike heavily after the 2024 floods. So these are all just buyouts. They're not necessarily anchored to one event or the other.
Okay, yeah.
Everything kind of, when it starts the buyout process, it all kinds of flows together. So we've got, if you start from the top left, we've got 3 kicked off, 47 that are getting appraised. I apologize, DOB and VTA. I forget what that means. Not date of birth. I think that means they're in the assessment phase.
Okay.
It's obviously before the legal and the closing phase.
Yeah.
And then, and that all happens before they move to demolition. On the bottom side is like our award status, right? So we have 104 where the award is signed. FEMA has obligated those funds to us. Funds that are promised under an award can be pulled back from the federal government, but it is unusual and unlikely. It has occurred in some cases, but the current administration has generally pulled back funds on programs that really hit the executive orders that they published around DEI. And they said anything you haven't spent yet, right? So issue a stop spending order. So if any of these awards were in danger, which I don't think they will be, honestly, I think they're very low risk for cancellation, we would get a stop work kind of notification on these awards.
So so there's 104, is that double counting? Is the 56 a different 56 than the
Different.
104 and 115 is a different 115?
Right.
So what we're talking about is like 270 that are in some sort of process there, is that?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct. 115 are with FEMA, getting reviewed by them. And that number did elevate a little bit during the 30-day manual review pause. And I think it might even already have started to move.
And when you say in development, what does that mean? The select board hasn't approved it yet, or what is that?
It's in one of those early phases where it still hasn't been submitted by the state to FEMA. So it's somewhere in that select board has to approve or the state has to review the award and approve. It's in those earlier stages.
Okay. And Tom, you had a question.
And this is far more buyouts than we've done in the last 15 years.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't see what BTA stands for, but DOB is duplication of benefits.
Oh, yes. Yes. I should have remembered that one. Duplication of benefits review. Especially if they received a FEMA individual assistance award, we need to make sure that they used it and have receipts. If you don't keep your receipts on the individual assistance award, it reduces the amount you get in a buyout.
Okay.
Or other funds.
Seeing on the locals, in our LTRG, we're seeing that it,
We'll have them keeping their receipts.
or haven't been given receipt. I mean, there's just a lot of, again, facets to this where the rules are clear, but stubbornness or personal, things that are happening where a landlord may not be giving a temporary tenant receipts for their rent. They can't get reimbursed.
Yeah.
Without that. So there's just.
Ugh. Okay.
Yeah, I think the VTA drafting is the technical agreement, like all the agreements to actually take the property out. So this is like the middle kind of getting the paperwork finalized phase
Great.
before moving into closing.
So only one has actually been, or maybe it's not even finished yet.
One property is in the closing stage, but has not been finished yet. So we haven't actually demolished and finished any of the bylaws in 2023 yet. But it took us a good 6 to 9 months to build the program and to set up all the processes. And so now that everything is set up, we do anticipate we'll start to see that flowing through and we'll start to see more progress. We did have to go out and RFP legal services, RFP demolition services. We had to set up contracts for all of those things. So all of that structure is now in place.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Which should help us. And then, so this is HMGP Hazard Mitigation Grant Program and the Swift Current Grant, which Swift Current was basically a more narrow, repetitive damage focused version of hazard mitigation only for buyouts. So I wanted all the buyouts to be on one page.
Okay.
And then with any capacity that remains in our hazard mitigation grant awards after the buyouts, because buyouts have been treated as top priority, then we have floodplain restoration projects that we're really looking to do. But we need the numbers to be locked in before we know how much money we'd actually have to do those projects. And then, as you know, earlier in December, AOA being the we in this case, reverted ARPA funds and created 26 million for the hazard mitigation program. A big portion of that, of course, will be used for match. And the thing none of us could have predicted was the 2024 storms those actually will come with a $15 million or so hazard mitigation award, which would have $5 million of match that goes along with it. So we'll be able to stretch that money farther by using it as match.
Yeah.
But every dollar we use for match, we can't use for state funded projects. What's not on this screen, we don't have as good of visibility into it because we're running it as block grants, is the $3 million of elevation funding that was sent out last year to communities like Barry and Johnson and Montpelier. That will help with hopefully at least 10 to a dozen elevations alongside these efforts. So that's not shown on this page.
And are those homes and businesses or?
I think that was entirely residential.
Yeah, that's crazy, but.
I remember this was the response in Florida to hurricanes, going down and seeing more things up on stilts and it works for a little while. Yeah.
It's been storms again.
Yeah. Tom.
I don't know if I'm cutting you off or on the first slide, does it include the municipalities and the roads and infrastructure like that was damaged? Is that in that first slide?
Yes.
Other public assistance?
Yes, municipal road and infrastructure is roughly 200 million out of that 815. Right. And the 173 that was spent would primarily be mostly on temporary repairs to either roads or bridges. And then some permanent repairs, the money's already been spent. But in a lot of those projects, I think this is the first serious construction season where a lot of permanent work is going to be done, unless the temporary work was done in a way that it counts as permanent.
And so did you have to get a waiver or renegotiate the notion of FEMA replaces things to where they were? And I know during Irene, there was a huge delay because the negotiations had to go to, well, no, we want a larger culvert. Are those on,
Sorry.
do they remember that negotiations?
I'm laughing not out of disrespect, Representative, but because the timing is funny. So FEMA has at a high level said they will honor our codes and standards, which is saying in the event this culvert is you need to replace it based on hydrologic, based on the data, right? And but we've gone around the tree with them probably 24 times over the last year and a half on that, partly because the FEMA, especially when they have so many disasters, they don't have enough permanent staff to keep those staff on site. They also have IRS regulations that make it extremely difficult to keep someone on site for more than 50 weeks. There's a 50-week rule that they have to rotate people on, or their per diem becomes taxable and all these things. And it's just really, really silly, but bad. So I laughed, not out of disrespect to the committee, but because even as last week, I was reviewing the work of the culvert group that was still negotiating, going through line by line with FEMA and locking in this culvert replacement was in line with this code and standard, this culvert and it's not the first time we've done that. So we get the money eventually, but it does require, yes, and that's not anything to do with the new administration.
It's the way the rules have been written and they need to be.
And speaking a little bit off the cuff, my observations about FEMA is that it's not the people. The people in FEMA are great. They're public servants. They're really trying to do everything they can. But there are dozens of layers of FEMA. So there's distributed responsibility. And the person you work with at FEMA can't look at your culvert and say, yes, I approve that work. That was good work. And then you can honor that and know, hey, FEMA approved it. I can count on that. Anytime it goes up a level and it goes up through dozens of levels, it can always be reversed. And the person at the higher level doesn't usually have all the information that the person at the lower level did. So they look at it, they're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. And they deny it. And so it goes through all these cycles over and over and over again until the highest levels of FEMA understand. Now, some of the smaller work, doesn't get the scrutiny, right? But especially bigger ticket items or things that don't fit the mold. And our codes and standards are more protective and progressive than most other states. They're intended to set us up more properly for the future, and they're more expensive. So a lot of other states don't take as productive as an approach as us.
And
So FEMA doesn't understand it often when they come from another state.
they don't, yeah, because the point is the bigger culverts or we're doing this again and again.
Yeah, the ironic part for me that again makes me laugh is there are multiple occasions where FEMA held Vermont up as an example of a state that was doing things right and that wanted to, protect themselves going forward. And then their project manager comes in and says, "Oh, you didn't need to put in a bigger culvert here." It's like, well, yes, we did. And here's the code and here's the standard and here's the H&H study that shows we did. And again, the people are all good, but again, it's like it's all the layers.
Yeah.
That
On that 50-week rule is, during Irene, that first initial flush of FEMA representatives came in and they were very positive about what we were doing and how we reacted as a community, et cetera, et cetera. And then they rotated and that second group of people came in and went, review. And it delayed quite a bit. It delayed the state complex by a year.
Yeah.
At the very least, never mind anything else. So
because of the concurrent disasters, some towns have had 8, 9, 10 PDMGs, project development managers that they worked with at FEMA, and they have to restart almost every time.
Running into that with some of the really smaller towns that are trying to do their best to get the paperwork together. Sometimes they might list who the contact is for the town, first name, last name, but first name, middle initial, last name, those things for.
Oh.
Yeah, after the win, it's just,
Yeah. I'm still getting my head around the fact that the July 2023 floods were 2 times more expensive than Irene.
$217 million for Irene. That was, of course, in that year's dollars. So inflated, it'd be closer to 300 million. But the Capitol complex, when water got into that building, that was a huge problem.
So some of the same areas were hit as were hit during Irene. And of course, we're putting better things back after each one. So did you have any documentation of, how those improvements saved us money, saved us losses?
We haven't done a formal study of it, but VM, the towns, AOT have all observed quite frequently that very few of the assets that we replaced after Irene were actually damaged in 23 or 24. So a very low rate, like less than 1 in 10 of the things that we upgraded and changed and after Irene were damaged this time around. So it saved us. I'm convinced it would have been a $2 billion disaster if not for Irene.
Nice to have a record, some sort of a record so that we don't have the loss of that institutional memory as people observed.
Sure. I just want to share what happened in Brattleboro. With Irene, we had extensive damage. From a brook that turned into a river, damage to downtown, damaged housing, which essentially was put in a wetland. They removed that housing. They built different, because this was an affordable housing elder. They built it somewhere else, returned that to wetland floodplain. Subsequently, we haven't seen the damage.
Mhm.
The wetland acted as it should and prevented flooding downstream. A little bit of proactive work there that saved us now long term.
And I think there are a lot of stories like that in East Middlebury. We did something with the East Middlebury River and that had flooded during Irene, and when the July floods happened, that affected Ripon and Madison County. It held. So, the proof is in the pudding, right? That those mitigation things are.
Wetlands work.
Yeah.
Melrose Terrace in Brattleboro worked extremely well. Dog River Park in Northfield Falls, extremely successful. The Brandon Culvert was just amazing to see the videos of that.
Building going across the street. Oh my God.
Cabot upsized their culverts, but it still wasn't enough due to debris. Like that was where the chaos of flooding comes in. They had great culverts, more than enough for the water, but then a lot of trees came down the mountain and they had a municipal employee out there with backhoe trying to pull the trees out of the river during the event. Just couldn't keep up with it and also was extremely dangerous and probably shouldn't have been doing that.
Yeah,
We'll see some stuff, and point out some stuff in Waterbury too, that was plus and minus
Yeah.
on that too.
we're gonna
Right.
be taking a look tomorrow, so.
Yeah, the pictures of the complex where it only suffered like $200 of damage to clean up the parking lot. That was extremely productive. I know the cornfield
Right.
issue.
I mean, we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I really appreciate you coming in and talking about this. We've been concerned with what's happening with FEMA and how it's impacting us. It sounds like things are going as one would want them to be going, albeit slower, but that's sort of situation normal. Doug, I'd love to get you back in to talk about ARPA at some time, to get an update on that. Do you have another report that's due at some point that we could just piggyback off of, or what's?
Yes, so we are submitting our data to FEMA on April 30th. Because of just our funding kind of dwindling, we don't have White House support for our ARPA work any longer. So it might take us a couple extra days to package that, but I can give a good report out on current numbers in May.
All right, well, we will get you back in May and hear that update, because that's the other piece of what you do that's important to hear us to hear as well, so.
One quick thought before I go. The Treasury notification that had some people concerned about we're going to recapture any funds that weren't obligated, et cetera, et cetera. Honestly, that was anticipated and Vermont is well protected from that.
Okay, all right. That's good news for right now. We appreciate it. And then we'll get the update. But that's what we want to hear for right now. Thank you very much for coming in.
Sure.
Thank you. And so committee, we are back at 1:00. We didn't get to meet with the Secretary of State and Attorney General on Friday because we were on the floor. And so now they're coming in starting at 1:00. So we'll have those two folks joining us, and that's what we have for the afternoon. So,
On the list, Doug, for it's future FEMA.
yeah. Future FEMA?
Future FEMA, like, not just what's been happening, but what may happen, what's been threatened.
We may get when he comes in for ARPA, maybe we'll have more
Yeah,
information.
just as another
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, that's it for now.